You're watching Going Underground. I'm Afshin Rattansi. Coming up in the show, David Cameron may not have condemned the slaughter of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, but a new UN report accuses Israel's leaders of facilitating the killing. We talk to Palestine's ambassador to the UK. And Hollywood is concerned with the Wikileaks SONY hack, which reveals Spiderman has to be white. We talk to Wikileaks about that, and more seriously, 500,000 secret documents from Saudi Arabia.
Plus, we'll be reviewing the news of the week, from dirty tricks in GCHQ through to realignments in Syria.
All this and more on today's Going Underground. David Cameron and Barack Obama may not agree with the allegations, but tomorrow Palestine's foreign minister files two claims of Israeli war crimes at the International Criminal Court. One concerns last summer's Gaza conflict, in which Britain and America armed the Israelis. Close to 15,000 Palestinian civilians were killed or wounded. On the Israeli side, 67 Israeli soldiers and 6 civilians were killed. 1,600 Israelis were also wounded. The other war crime charge refers to illegal settlements, to which Britain and America appear to be turning a blind eye. Palestine's ambassador to the UK, Manuel Hassassian, joins me now for an exclusive interview here on Going Underground. Welcome, Ambassador. Let's begin with the report citing evidence of war crimes on both sides. The Israeli spokespeople already saying the Secretary General of the UN himself doesn't think the organization who made out this report is credible.
First of all, I think it is credible. We have to accept, the Commission of Inquiry's investigation. However, we are a little bit disappointed that they put Palestinians and Israelis on equal footing. The victim and the victimizer in this issue cannot really be accepted, by the sheer fact that this naked aggression that took place against innocent civilians in Gaza, all right, using, all kinds of sophisticated weapons. And you just mentioned the figures. The figures were staggering. When you have 2,252 killed, 500 of them, more than 5 are children, 300 are women. How could you equate that with 67 and 61 of them were soldiers who were, on the ground, killing and shooting indiscriminately innocent Palestinians? Now, one thing which is very important in this report is the fact that for the first time, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry comes out loud to say that Israel has done this with impunity, for the simple fact that they were targeting residential houses. They were even on the ground shooting at crowds. That in itself is a violation of human rights, and this is against the 4th Geneva Convention, let alone...
But it does say evidence of war crimes on both sides. Some Palestinians in Gaza may be wondering why you can even compare the scale of carnage. But you, as the Palestinian Authority, seems to be suggesting is this report should be looked at as a serious report.
It's a serious report, but as I said in the beginning, we cannot equate the victim and the victimizer. This was a naked aggression.
Which this report does, though.
Yes, but actually the retaliation, of the Palestinians to this naked aggression should not really put in the category of war crimes. Taking into consideration, first of all, the number of Israelis were killed and what targets, the Palestinians have really achieved, by launching those rockets. So first of all, it's not an even-handed report. Although, the description by itself is interpreted by the international community that it was biased towards the Palestinians and not towards the Israelis. But we, as the Palestinian Authority, have taken the report. Now we're studying it, carefully, and there will be an official answer, to this report.
Okay, well, tens of thousands, as we said, wounded or killed on the Palestinian side. But do you recognize the report talking about the execution of collaborators by Palestinians in Gaza, on Palestinian violence?
Well, actually, the question of collaboration and what have, this is an internal matter. If it comes, it should come from Palestinians towards Palestinians, but it should not be part and parcel of this report. This was a war committed against innocent civilians in Gaza. And of course, Israel, used excessive power used brutal power, used sophisticated military power, and used them and tried them on Palestinians. Of course, most of these weapons are supplied by the United States and by the United Kingdom, and that's why, you know, we as Palestinians, we don't really approve of such help, you know, given to Israel. And to use such sophisticated weaponry as a test on innocent civilians by itself is a war crime.
We're continuing to arm the Israeli government. David Cameron failed to condemn the violence. What is your role as ambassador? Because Britain now does recognize Palestine as a state. Just tell us, what is the state of Palestine and whether your role as ambassador is different? It says mission in your address.
First of all, we are not recognized as a full-fledged state. We are recognized as a diplomatic mission. So we are one step shorter for the full recognition of statehood. That's number one. Number two, the British government does not recognize even the Palestinians. And as you know, the parliament voted for Palestinian statehood. And of course, the voting of the parliament or for statehood is not obligatory to the government. So it was for us a symbolic gesture by the parliamentarians, 274, and that in itself reflects the mood that the public opinion in the UK is supporting the quest of independent statehood for the Palestinians. Now, the irony of the matter is the fact that the government has not been responsive basically to the public opinion, let alone to the parliamentary.
So the Foreign Office doesn't even recognize you as a full ambassador?
No.
Look, at the moment, we're hearing all this stuff about your government, the Palestinian government, taking people to the ICC. The ICC is ridiculed by the entire developing world, certainly in Africa. Why this obsession by the Palestinian Authority with the International Criminal Court here in The Hague to mete out justice for war crimes?
Let me assure you first that everything that we're doing in our capacity is to make sure that Israel cannot continue its war crimes, its occupation with impunity. So if the peace process has been stalled and the third party is not influencing, i.e. the United States, the Israelis to come back to the negotiating table, we have put some conditions as Palestinian leadership. One of the conditions is the fact that Israel should halt settlement activities. Second, they should release the fourth batch of the pre-Oslo prisoners.
The International Red Cross very concerned now about the hunger striker Khadr Adnan. Just quickly tell me, what's happening on that case?
His condition is precarious at best. I think, you know, the guy is in his last stages, you know. For 50 days, 51 days, he have been, you know, on hunger strike, and Israel does not even really care to consider, you know, such a humanitarian, you know, aspect.
And he's a political prisoner.
He's a political prisoner. He's not a criminal. He's not, I mean, he's a political prisoner. The Cameron government does not officially recognize us even to the General Assembly, when we went to the General Assembly, and we had more than 130 countries in the world that recognize us as a state. The UK abstained. They did not. So there is a certain stand by this government vis-à-vis the Palestinian when it comes to the question of statehood. No official recognition.
I'm sure
the UK is still considering trading arms with Israel. Billions of dollars of exchange of arms trade between the UK and Israel. Now, if you want to put
evidence
pressure,
that those arms actually were involved in the slaughter in Gaza last year.
Of course, you know, all the weapons that Israel gets from the UK, Europe, and the United States are being used in Gaza. As I told you, Gaza has been a guinea pig for the use of these sophisticated weapons.
But instead of going to the ICC, isn't the war really with the United States and Israel? I'm sure Foreign Office officials here say the reason they vote the way you're complaining about is because of the Israeli lobby and the United States lobby.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, the UK, when it comes basically to the Palestinian issue, they consider the human rights aspects of it. They have the right discourse when it comes to a two-state solution. They have always been adamant in their position, saying that settlements are illegal. They have never recognized Jerusalem as the eternal united capital of Israel. I have to give certain credit to the UK government. But, you know, you put your money where your mouth is. I mean, to concretize that, you know, the UK government should be bold enough to put pressures on the Americans, since they are strategically allied in the Middle East, to stop this nonsense of supporting Israel indirectly through diplomatic diplomatic posturing and to come and tell us to circumvent all our strenuous efforts in getting that kind of a recognition, because they have been affecting the entire European countries, and you have 29 countries. We thank the Swedish government per se, as a government, has recognized us as a state. Okay, well, imagine if the UK has recognized us as a state.
We'll have to leave that to Philip.
28 countries in Europe would recognize. Then the ball game would have been completely different. The Americans cannot sit idle not to acknowledge and accept and acquiesce the fact that we are a state in the United Nations. Then the whole story will be changed. It won't be negotiations between top dog, underdog, unequivocally supported by the United States. It becomes a state-to-state negotiations, talking about fixed borders, 1967 borders, and not as disputed borders, but as occupied land.
We'll have to leave that to the Foreign Office. Of course, we hear from the State Department that they're having problems with Israel. That's why Laurent Fabius of France is maybe offering the latest round of peace talks. Is the United States, under President Obama, finally splitting from the AIPAC lobby on K Street in Washington, or is it mood music that doesn't really make any difference?
Let me tell you frankly, first of all, we really appreciate the strenuous efforts exerted by John Kerry and President Obama. This is the first president who had put all his efforts in trying to clinch a deal between the Palestinians and
all his efforts.
All his efforts. But you have to understand one important factor. The decision-making process is not in the hands of the chief executive of the United States, because he only has 20% of that power in the decision-making process. 80% is in the hands of Congress. And the number one enemy to the Palestinian people is U.S. Congress, that is manipulated, you know, by AIPAC and many other organizations like Christians for Zion and what have you, that have a direct impact, you know, on congressmen. And that's why every time there is a certain kind of a breakthrough by the White House, by the Foreign Office or Secretary of State and what have you, they are being blocked by Congress.
Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break. 3 years trapped in an embassy in London, but Julian Assange is releasing another 500,000 secret documents. We talk to WikiLeaks.
Plus, we'll be reviewing a series of stories involving strange bedfellows in politics.
All this and more in part 2 of Going Underground. With me is broadcaster and former Member of Parliament, Lembit Opik. Lembit, thank you for coming back on the show to look at some of the papers after what happened last time. The House of Lords is debating Syria today, which is no doubt why you've chosen this from the Sulzberger family's New York Times.
Yes, the theme today is politics and strange bedfellows, and this is perhaps the strangest of them all. The story here from the New York Times is Assad's forces may be aiding new ISIS surge. This is an amazing turnabout.
Wait a minute, it's not a turnabout. This is lies from the New York Times and from the State Department and probably for tomorrow's Armed Services Committee.
How can you say that? The West essentially helped to set up ISIS or ISIL or IS, whatever
That's
you want
one
to call
viewpoint.
It, in the first, well, allegedly, but I'm pretty sure that there's evidence for that, because they wanted to get rid of Assad. Now, Assad, if this is correct, and I'm not really sure it's correct either, is allegedly letting them fight the insurgents who are fighting him. The story isn't about Assad, it's the complete mess in Syria, and we're partly culpable for this. It doesn't actually matter so much whether ISIS is being helped.
Well, it kind of does, really,
no,
because it's a complete misunderstanding of the situation. If the House Armed Services Committee today in Congress read this, they're really going to be very confused.
Afshin,
there is no way President Assad is helping
Afshin,
ISIS.
That's the point. The whole thing is a propaganda mess. We've messed up in Syria. Now we want to blame Assad. I'm violently agreeing with you on that.
Violently?
Violently.
I think we've had enough violence in this world.
This is little better, really, than the last one. You cynical man.
Sceptical.
Cynical, I think. The Guardian says, Nick Robinson, Cameron threatened to close down BBC on election bus. Basically, it looks like Cameron had a temper tantrum on one day under the pressure of the general election before he realised he would win his stunning victory. And Nick Robinson, who's a pretty reliable character, says...
Reliable? Former Tory president of local constituency.
Exactly.
Completely biased. Ofcom are on his case all the time, I think.
Think about it. The answer's contained in your outburst. Nick Robinson, is known to have Tory sympathies, and he's telling us that, and also he works for the BBC, well, has worked for the BBC many times actually. He's telling us that Cameron threatened on the bus to shut down the BBC because, in a fit of pique, he didn't like the way something had been reported. Well, we do know that the Tories have been gunning for the TV licence fee for a long time. This doesn't bode well for the BBC, whether you love it or loathe it. This, ironically, increases the politicisation of the BBC because it sounds like a veiled threat from the top.
You'd think the political editor would just agree with the rewriting of the Charter by the current Culture Secretary. The BBC,
could be.
Anyway, we're very bored by anti-austerity demonstrations, very little coverage compared to RT. What's this from Murdoch's Vice magazine?
This next story is interesting and in some ways it's rather melancholy. Vice tells us why Saturday's anti-austerity demo probably won't affect austerity. About 150,000 people marched through London to
150, 250 or 20?
Probably 500,000.
Or 5 people, according to the Daily Mail.
Well, it could have been, and only 3 according to the police. They probably arrested them, actually, for this. The fact of the matter is...
I didn't say that.
The point here is that 150,000 or whatever number marched through London to say we're against cuts way too late. The Tories won, and this is incredible. They won on the promise of making more cuts, which will mainly affect the poorest people in our society. This debate was lost on the 7th of May.
Exactly. If demonstrations changed anything, women would have the vote. No, hang on. Anyway, it's the pro-austerity demo tomorrow at the Serpentine in central London in Hyde Park. I'm interested in. Goldman Sachs sponsoring it. A Tory donor who's a convicted criminal banker on the board of it. I wonder if the BBC will be covering the pro-austerity demo art gallery opening.
I suspect they probably won't.
Well, there's no austerity for some reason for the Secret Services, according to The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald's magazine.
Yes, they've branched out. There's a group called JTRIG, which stands for Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group, which has sponsored this story. A controversial GCHQ unit engaged in domestic law enforcement, online propaganda, psychology research. Essentially, we've got state-controlled trolls. These people go out, work out who the bad guys are, and then have aliases. They set up pretend chat rooms, and they even keep a record of people who visited Wikileaks. Essentially, this is all the stuff that ministers and MPs say is terrible when it's done by the public. Good news, of course, if you like trolling and you don't want to get into trouble, go work in GCHQ. Jay Trigg's got just the job for you.
It's a horrifying story you've chosen. Tomorrow's the annual report by the Intelligence Services Commission overseeing GCHQ. I did notice some of this. Obedience is a direct form of social influence where an individual submits to or complies with an authority figure. So in between, they're making fake Facebook profiles, fake Twitter accounts, fake discredit, deceive, dissuade, denigrate people, psychology of trust.
And what you've just read is actually the specifics from the report that came out.
It's actually there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible. If you made this up for a BBC docudrama, people would say it's just too much is not true.
Upload YouTube videos containing persuasive communications. We upload persuasive communications.
No, we pay for them to do this, basically to keep us safe, to keep us free and honest. They do negative propaganda and trolling.
Thank you, Lembit. See you soon.
Maybe.
A remarkable silence has hit the mainstream media as Julian Assange's Wikileaks organisation begins to release 500,000 secret Saudi documents. It comes as the UK government told this programme that David Cameron continues to provide support for ongoing Saudi bombing of Yemen. Away from today's talks in Geneva, 20 million, or 80% of the population of Yemen, now face humanitarian disaster, according to the UN. Julian Assange is under virtual house arrest at an estimated cost of £11 million to the UK taxpayer. But Kristinn Hrafnsson of Wikileaks joins me now. Kristinn, welcome back to Going Underground. Tell me why you firstly think that it hasn't made more of a splash in the mainstream media, this release of 500,000 documents.
Well, there are only a little over 60,000 out now, as of last Friday. We will release them in batches of tens of thousands over the coming weeks. when you the material is hard for Western journalists to decipher. I mean, they are in Arabic, but they are in a searchable format, so it will take time, I would guess, for the stories coming out, and we are seeing that sort of increasing day by day.
How do we know that they're not fake?
Well, we are fairly confident that they are not fake, and we can refer to our track record. We have published millions of documents, and not a single one has been found out to be inauthentic.
So we can expect them to come out in coming weeks. The Saudi authorities already telling their population to ignore them.
Yes, and actually they are threatening the population for repercussion if they distribute them. Well, it doesn't surprise anybody, I guess. They do not like the spotlight on their dark secrets, and especially when it comes to their own subject. Now,
to some of the central revelations that have come out since you released the first batch on Friday. Britain has banned an Iranian TV channel here, Press TV. What did you make of the revelation that Saudi Arabia has been funding a propaganda channel aimed at the Iranian people based in British-backed Bahrain?
Well, it doesn't really surprise me to see that. I mean, we are talking about a government here who has no regard for any fundamental civil liberties or freedoms, and press freedom is, of course, non-existent there.
There was no public announcement by the United States authorities that Osama bin Laden's son had requested a death certificate for Osama bin Laden. What did you make of that document?
Well, I think it's interesting that they are unwilling to facilitate a family with a single document. I would imagine that this is necessary for practical reasons, even for the family. And undoubtedly this denial will fuel conspiracy theorists or speculations which are already fairly well prominent, that things were not as it seems when it came to the killing of Osama bin Laden.
And it's purely administrative as to why we did a search for MI5, MI6, no mention at all in this tranche of 61,000 cables, just a couple with David Cameron in it.
Well, I mean, again, only about 1/10 of the entire trove is out. Let's see what might come out later. These are mainly documents pertaining from the Foreign Ministry. Some of them are from other administrative organizations within Riyadh, but I would suggest that we could see interesting revelations in the documents to come.
Anything as good as, well, when WikiLeaks, it was credited with helping to spark the Arab Spring because it showed how rich the rulers of these US-backed Arab dictatorships were as compared to the populations. I mean, there's nothing as exciting for our mainstream press as the Halloween party in Saudi Arabia, which had drink and sex workers. Is that why?
Well, I mean, what excites the mainstream media here? I mean, that's a good question. I mean, is it time for spring in London? Westminster financing the atrocities carried out in Yemen, as you have pointed out, and selling arms to this government. We're talking about an oppressive government with no regard for human rights. Last week they carried out their 100th beheading. This year, an escalation. The entire last year it was only 60, well, only were 60 beheadings. So we are seeing an escalation there in domestic violence and oppression and armed intervention abroad. And this is our, in brackets, our friends.
I've got to ask one mainstream question, though, because
Yeah.
WikiLeaks is also releasing these Sony hack documents. Did you have a big laugh at WikiLeaks headquarters, which is maybe the embassy, about the that Spiderman has to be white and heterosexual in any film version of the cartoon?
Well, I mean, there are quite interesting stories in these. But I mean, in general, it is interesting to see the inside of this powerful organization. Just I mean, we can have laughs about some of the inside stories, but let's not forget that this is a powerful conglomerate. Has very strongly influenced the trade agreement now being conducted about in the Pacific Rim, for example. So it is a powerhouse.
It's not just Sony worrying about sexual diseases spreading across there.
It's not just Mickey Mouse, it's about power.
Film lots. About Julian Assange himself, Britain has, it's been widely reported, spending 11 million, keeping him there in the embassy. What is the state of his appeal? Because some said that Swedish authorities were going to come and visit him.
Well, according to our information last week, they were represented from the prosecutor in Sweden already here in London. I mean, I think in April it was a date was set for this interview, this interrogation, which is Julian has been asking for 4 years.
That date was in June last week.
Yes, and then it turns out that the Swedish prosecutor had not carried out the formality to request this to be carried out on Ecuadorian soil, de facto, until 2 days, working days prior to that, and this was just unacceptable. So I fail to understand what the Swedish prosecutor and the Swedish authorities are trying to achieve here, but
so sorry,
obviously not moving.
To come to the embassy and then suddenly went, we can't do this on technically Ecuadorian soil here in Knightsbridge in central London.
Well, I mean, the Ecuadorians have been very willing to offer the premises for the interrogation, but this has to be processed in through the bureaucracy. These are two countries that do not have a set agreement on mutual legal assistance. The Swedish prosecutor is setting out some demands on how to carry this out, and you just don't throw that into the embassy on a Monday and want to come in on a Wednesday morning. We keep to our determination to expose the secrets of powerful governments.
Kristinn Hrafnsson, thank you.
Thank you.
On Saturday's show, we broadcast an interview with Charlotte Simon Bagumba from Mothers of Congo. The UN agency in Congo, MONUSCO, has since given us a statement in response to the allegations of UN complicity in sexual violence made in that show. We hope to have a representative from MONUSCO on a future episode. In the meantime, the statement can be viewed on our website. Meanwhile, in the past 48 hours, the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has appointed a panel to investigate the response of his organization to allegations of sexual abuse linked to the presence of foreign military forces in the Central African Republic, which borders the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's it for today, but join us again on Saturday when, after this week's victories against ISIS by the Kurdish YPG in Syria, we ask what Britain is doing to aid the PKK's military affiliates in their fight against ISIS. And as ever, we're on Twitter, Facebook, SoundCloud and email. Also, don't forget RT UK News with Bill Dodd. It's on every weekday evening on the hour from 7 till 10. See you on Saturday, 8 years to the day since Tony Blair resigned as Prime Minister.